Welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly. Our main topics today: Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman resigns, sending shockwaves through the Israeli political system. Is Israel headed for early elections? And the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas draws criticism from Gaza border residents. I am Ladar Greve-Lazi, and joining me in the studio to discuss are Director of Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman, Zionist Union member of Knesset, Professor Yossi Yona, journalist Gilad Zwick, and founder of the Democracy Defense Front, Uri Zaki. Following a two-day escalation with Hamas that saw nearly 500 missiles launched into Israel, the two sides agreed to a ceasefire in a move that has drawn widespread criticism from residents along the Gaza border. Disillusioned with the government for what they see as too soft a response to terror and the IDF's inaction, southern residents are demanding to put an end once and for all to the constant barrage of missile attacks. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the latest rounds of hostility was hailed by Hamas as a victory.
People are here just had enough. They had enough. We don't have any security, any confidence. It's amazing that, we're such a strong country. We have all the abilities to strike Hamas within a day, and just losers.
الشعب اليوم بانتصار المقاومة والشعب مع المقاومة ونقول للمقاومة الشعب خلفك وانتصار المقاومة هو انتصار للشعب الفلسطيني.
Dr. Sherman, I'd like to start with you. Was the decision to agree to a ceasefire the best course of action in your opinion, or will Israel find itself in a new round of hostilities with an emboldened Hamas in the very near future?
Of course it was the wrong decision. The problem in Gaza is far more conceptual than operational. As long as the Israeli leadership perceive the Hamas and the Palestinian Arabs in general as a potential peace partner for some future arrangement, they will never be able to formulate a policy that will bring a resolution to the conflict. They should perceive the Palestinians in general and the Gazans in particular as how they perceive themselves, as an implacable enemy whose enmity towards the Jewish state is not based on what the Jewish state does, but what the Jewish state is. The conflict is a clash between two rival collectives with incompatible founding narratives. Only one side can emerge victorious. There are no consolation prizes. The only solution for Gaza is for Israel to take Gaza and begin a large-scale international project for incentivized immigration of the non-belligerent Palestinians there. The only way that Israel can ensure who rules Gaza is by ruling it itself. The only way it can rule Gaza without having to control another people is by creating a situation where the other people can find better, more secure lives outside the circle of violence and free from the stranglehold of the cruel, corrupt cliques who've led them from disaster to debacle for decades.
Uri Zaki, do you agree with this assessment?
Of course, I don't agree with this assessment. I actually quite resent the mere, presenting transfer of 2.5 million people.
No, not transfer, economic enhancement.
I don't know. That sounded to me quite like a transfer policy. Okay, but I listened to you very carefully.
You can leave them in their present misery, wallowing in sewage with no electricity, no drinking water, and the people who are responsible for that are people who wanted to force statehood on the Palestinians.
Sir, if I can, I'm referring to what I heard from you. I heard you quite carefully. I believe that first of all, Netanyahu, who no one can suspect as being a left-winger, but rather the unequivalent leader of the right in Israel, who has no substitute in the right in Israel, he pushed for a ceasefire because he understands that the result of his own policy of not negotiating with Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority leads him, much like his predecessors, as an ally of Hamas. And as an ally of Hamas, meaning that Hamas is the only, in order to maintain the disconnect between Gaza and the West Bank, he has to have Hamas in power. And in order to do that, he's a prisoner of their wishes. Now, I salute him for his boldness, for not listening to the populace in his own camp, as we hear now, and not pushing Israel into a futile war that would not be, the result would not be any different than the situation we have right now, but with much more bloodshed from both sides, and especially for Israel, southern Israel, and the rest of the country. I salute him for his boldness. I wish he would use the same kind of leadership to lead Israel towards a strategic agreement with the Palestinian people that will end the conflict.
What has happened for you people to admit that you're wrong? You know, when Israel withdrew from Gaza,
we're not in power. You have a government that you elected, and that's what they do right now. I mean, why should I say?
Don't turn me into.
Our policy was never tested
for the government.
Okay, let me turn to you, Professor Yona.
Of course, that I totally disagree with this sort of the gloom and gloom prospect that had been sort of
there's
put
so much
on
room for optimism.
sort of being put on the table by our friend here, Martin. I agree with my friend here, Zaki. And the interesting thing is, indeed, the Prime Minister is saying that, well, there's no military solution to Gaza. So it is a very sort of, I would say, frustrating and heartbreaking, you know, for us Israelis when the Prime Minister comes and says, well, look, I mean, I have no solution. So, which means they are doomed for more and more rounds of violence without a solution at end. Or, as my friend here is suggesting, well, a little bit of interpretation on our part, that it is a complete transfer of the Palestinians, giving them some positive incentives. You know, this is how it works all over the world. You know, you give people incentives, they leave their homelands. But anyway, you know, so you've got these.
Have you seen what's happening in Gaza? Have you seen the desire to leave from Gaza?
I would like to remind people don't know that when the proposal at the time by Sharon to disengage from Gaza, I objected it altogether, you know, because I said, well, look, you know, disengaging from Gaza without agreement, that would be a disaster. That would be disaster, because at the end of the day, you know, I have this rhetoric. Well, we left Gaza. Look what we got. We never left Gaza. We never left Gaza. You know, the money that are being using, it is Israeli. You know, when a child is born in Gaza, when it is registered? Do you know that?
I didn't know.
Ministry of Interior.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of water, supply of water to Gaza, we have the full control of that.
Because they don't build desalination plants.
Electricity, we have control of that. Which
Why?
means
Because
that we have never left Gaza. Gaza in a siege. And I fully agree with the analysis provided here by my friend, that it is the interest of our Prime Minister to actually to ensure the rulership of Hamas over Gaza, so that it would come up with the pretext, hey guys, what on earth, with whom are we going to talk about peace negotiations? There are two entities. So it is his interest that the two entities being maintained, so that it would be an excuse of not moving forward to think about. And I want to conclude this round at least with this statement, my friend Martin. It is not that I'm sure that there would be peace, but give peace a chance.
We gave peace a chance. Well, you know, when the Oslo agreements came on, there were two camps. There were proponents and the opponents. The proponents promised sweeping benefits, and the opponents warned of grave dangers. Quarter of a century later, none of the promises came true, and all of the threats materialized. The jury is no longer out. You were wrong. You are responsible for what's happening. You are responsible for what's happening in Gaza, because you tried to foist statehood on the Palestinians.
Sharon is not an independent leader.
Sorry?
Sharon was not an independent leader. We, the left, took him, you know, by whatever, his ears, and forced upon him to disengage from Gaza.
Sharon was part of the coalition who voted, and he personally voted for the disengagement. Many of the left
Netanyahu against the disengagement.
So if the right was wrong a quarter of a century ago or 2 decades ago, we must continue with the same mistake.
Hold on 1 second. I'd like to hear from Gilad.
Friend Gilad.
I think we confuse here between cause and effect. As my friend Martin said, the Palestinians in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria, okay, they don't fight against us because we keep lands. Only because we are here, because we are in the land of Israel, and they want us out. That's the whole story. Now, to think that if we, by the way, I'm sure like when was the disengagement?
2005.
Yeah, there were articles. I think Paris said that it will become the Singapore of the Middle East, and people actually believed in that. And you know what? It could have happened. You know, like if the Palestinians in Gaza had decided they only want like to work in Israel and to develop the Gaza Strip, it would have happened, okay? But we saw what they decide otherwise. Decide to launch rockets. They decide like, you know, all these protests, as we see, they try to invade into Israel and might murder people from the kibbutzim, the kibbutz around Gaza. Okay, it's not like a plan for peace. The Hamas.
And what about the settlement project? Is
What
it
is
plan
it
for
gonna-
peace?
Where? In Gaza?
No, in the West Bank.
Do you think that all the
But
Arabs...
we were talking now about Gaza.
you- yeah.
You see here,
But you present-
13 years.
you
No,
present
I'm
the
asking you.
situation-
I'm asking you.
Okay, so
no,
what-
because you began, Gilad, you began with some kind of comprehensive view about the situation. We're saying that the Palestinians actually want us out of here. By the way, I'm not all sure that many of them indeed want that prospect. It's not I'm disagreeing with you,
you read
but
the
I'm
polls?
challenging you, Gilad, and I'm saying, I'm asking you about the settlement project. Do you think that it is conducive to peace with
Excuse me,
Palestinians?
I must ask you,
Yes,
Mr.
yeah. I think it's
how?
important.
But really, in Gaza,
Yossi,
in
let
Gaza
me ask you-
itself,
let
they
me
say
ask you
that
something.
Palestinians...
Let me ask you.
Hold on.
Okay, hold on. Let's do final thoughts and we'll move on
do
to
you
our
think
next
that all
topic.
the
Dr.
Arabs
Sherman.
should be expelled from Israel once there's a Palestinian state?
No.
So why do you think the Jews should be expelled from a Palestinian
Because-
state?
because-
Why?
Why
Don't
should
be a
be a
hypocrite.
Judenrein?
No,
Why?
not.
Why?
Because you see, many of
Because
these
you know why.
settlements... No,
You
I
know the Jews will be torn limb from limb.
I'm very glad that you're able to ask me a question and to answer it immediately. So I'm sure that would you want to continue doing that, or let me the chance?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, because listen, there was a settlement. One way or another, there is the Israel. I'm very proud of my country with its military force, and I think that we have a
So long
beautiful
as they don't
country.
use it. Huh?
Eh?
So long as they don't use it.
No,
Terrorist
my
attack started in
friend.
67?
I was in a war, and when we were forced to use it, I used it, you know. But I don't think that today we're having a sort of kind of a choice war against the Palestinians. I'm urging the leadership of Israel. Hopefully, we would be part of the leadership to conceive, you know, to embark on this wagon of trying to strike some kind of a peace treaty with our
After
friends.
quarter of a century? After quarter of a century?
Yes.
After quarter of a century, what will
Well-
convince you that you're wrong?
Well, listen,
What
you
will
know,
convince
France,
you that you're
France
wrong?
and Germany fought for 100 years. There's like a
Oh,
concept,
so-
the 100 years war.
so what you're
so
saying
at the
is
end
that
of
Did they
the
want to
day,
eliminate
you know,
so
their
what you're-
enemy?
so what you-
like in here?
Sorry?
Like, did they want to eliminate their enemy?
Some
like
do, some
Hamas
don't.
wants?
Some do, some don't.
So what are you saying? What
It's
you're
not-
saying
it's
is
the same
Some
thing.
don't.
So you- so
You know,
what-
I don't
Okay,
like your
gentlemen, that's
monolithic view
all the
about,
time
you know,
we
the
have on this
Palestinian
topic.
just
We
read
have
your
to
papers.
move on to the next.
Go ahead.
I'll have to barge in unless I'll be given, the
Chance to
Martin
speak.
here is very, but we need to have our chance to talk. If not, I'll.
So one final thought.
My final thought is that there's no solution vis-a-vis Gaza, a long-term solution that does not involve an agreement with the Palestinians, a permanent status agreement, and the address to do that is not in Gaza, it's in Ramallah. His name is Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, and that's what Netanyahu should be doing.
An agreement. Wow, what an
Paying
original
salaries
idea.
to
So
terrorists.
moving on to our next topic. Defense Minister Victor Lieberman announced his resignation from his post this past week, sending shockwaves through the Israeli political system. While Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to maintain his coalition with the one-seat majority, warning that early elections could have disastrous consequences, Education Minister Naftali Bennett and Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon have said they will pull out and dissolve the coalition if their demands are not met.
אכן אני כאן על מנת להודיע על התפטרותי מתפקיד שר הביטחון של מדינת ישראל. השאלה הנשאלת למה דווקא עכשיו? ומבחינתי מה שקרה אתמול, הפסקת אש אתמול בשילוב עם כל התהליך ההסדרה מול חמאס, זה כניעה לטרור.
בימים האחרונים אני שוחחתי עם כל ראשי הקואליציה. הערב אפגש עם שר האוצר כחלון בניסיון אחרון למנוע את הפלת הממשלה. בתקופה ביטחונית רגישה זו לא צריך ולא נכון ללכת לבחירות.
Professor Yona, let's start with
Well,
you.
it seems that the last-ditch effort on part of our Prime Minister to salvage his government. It is a very interesting vision that we are actually seeing here, that the government is toppling itself, which means the government, or some of the members of the cabinet as well, not only Lieberman. We heard Moshe Kahlon, we heard Bennett saying, well, we have failed, and therefore it is high time for us to dissolve the government. Of course, we welcome this result. You see, I mean, it is almost inevitable that we're facing new general elections, but political life is usually replete with vagaries, uncertainties, and so forth and so on. So we're going to see whether this inevitability actually materializes. I do believe that it would. We are ready, we are embraced, and I think that we have a wonderful position here that the government is confessing to the public we have failed, please replace us, and we are willing to assume this role.
Now, Gaza border residents are disillusioned with Netanyahu, as we previously discussed, who's supposed to be very tough on security. Dr. Sherman, how will this affect him going into elections?
I think that there's a lot of uncertainty in the present. I mean, I was never really very optimistic that Lieberman could deliver the goods. I think that Netanyahu may be able to point out, which he should have done before he appointed Lieberman, blame Lieberman for bringing down a right-wing government. I find that Yossi Yona's optimism about the results, so at the moment at least, detached from reality.
With many guns or without?
Sorry?
With many guns or without?
I think as soon as Gantz enters the political race, he'll be significantly deflated, as nearly every single general was who came into Israeli politics.
Like Rabin, for instance.
Well, if you want to go back that far, but of course, we all know what Rabin brought to the country.
Prospects of hope. A solution, and then he was assassinated. Let's not forget that too.
Also, just before he was assassinated, just before he was going to pull out of the Oslo Agreement, according to his daughter.
Victim of peace.
Yeah. So I really don't see.
Victim of incitement and
victim of peace.
Messianism.
Hundreds of Israelis
I don't really think
buses.
I don't really think that there's going to be, unless there's some unexpected event which stirs the pot, I can't see that a new election will change things significantly.
Gilad, so what do you think some of the main challenges Netanyahu will face if we do go into elections?
I think Netanyahu is making a mistake, that he is exerting pressure, that he doesn't want elections. Only a month, 2 months ago, he was very confident that he showed that, okay, you want elections, no problem for me. I think now he's wrong that he's saying that we are in a year of elections. So it doesn't matter much that if there will be next year, which means in 8 months, like people will try to, every member of parliament, if we take Naftali Bennett or Lieberman, they will attack Netanyahu because they will want, towards the elections. So I don't think it matters much. He should have the same attitude, and like we have 4 months until the elections. So a lot of things might change also in Gaza. We need to remember that 10 years ago, the election were postponed because of a military operation in Gaza. Okay, so a lot of things might change. So I don't think he needs to like the situation right now will not maintain, in 4 months. So.
I think the wild card in the elections is probably Yair Lapid, and whether the public will finally realize that basically it's just a facade with nothing behind it, because I think the balance of what coalition is possible will be dependent on how much Bennett or Lapid get. And I think that will determine the kind of coalition that can be put together.
Uli, do you agree with that assessment?
I don't want to give grades to Lapid or anyone else in the opposition. I do agree that Lapid is lacking a strong ideological motivation. At the end of the day, I do believe that politics is about ideology, and Lapid is not picking sides, which I think I appreciate more political leaders who state their ideology rather than those who say, I am the ideology. Having said all that, I agree with Gilad that Netanyahu a few months ago was ready to topple the government himself on really marginal issues, and now all of a sudden he talks about the collapse of a right-wing government. I do take him seriously, though, and I suggest to all of us to take him seriously with the historical examples he's been giving, which is the 1992 collapse of the Shamir government, and then the rise of Rabin, and then the 1998 collapse of the Netanyahu government, which led to Barak's election in 1999. I do believe that his majority is very fragile. I do think that March is decades away, right? March 2019 is decades away, and that's the earliest date we're talking about. I don't think that necessarily what we see now is what's going to happen in the actual elections, and I do think that Netanyahu, given his strategy of basing all of his political strategy, unlike his predecessors from the Likud, only on the right-wing base, and now he's hurt in his base, that gives him a real potential of losing.
Okay, Professor Yano, last thought.
Yeah, I'm resenting a little bit, our discussion here, because we have not mentioned anything, about Gaza and the political issues Israel vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Well, the election, and I'm sure that's going to be about the failure in the economic field, housing field, and medical field. In many of these areas, there is a very miserable and clear failure of the government to alleviate plights of the citizens, to come up with progressive welfare services, and in almost all criteria of the OECD, we are lagging behind. And I wish that a lot of attention, or attention, be given to these issues, that also those issues would determine the future of the upcoming election.
Okay, great. That's all the time we have for today for ILTV's Israel Weekly. I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Martin Sherman, Professor Yossi Yona, Uli Zaki, and Gilad Zwick, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News, on Twitter at ILTV News, and on our website at iltv.tv. I'm Lidarga Velazi. Thanks for watching.